Again, this is Alan Smith, and we are going to do our final session on disciples' polity with this recording, this particular set of slides. Many of you have already been somewhat familiar with the way that the disciples work as an institution, but this is just going to be a kind of a reminder and a little update on how things are being done within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the 21st century. So give me just a second to get the share screen going. So we've looked at disciples' history, both starting all the way back with the time of Jesus and the setting in Old Testament Jewish priesthood and things of that nature. We looked at the development of the denomination from its roots in the Church of Scotland up until the end of the 19th century. Then the most immediate past set of sessions, we took a look at some of the theological issues, some of the basic beliefs of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And now we're going to look at the way the church operates as an institution in the section we identified as polity. Once again, polity has to do with how we do church, what kinds of things we do as a group to ensure the proper ministry at all the levels of the church. Many of you have seen this particular chart. It's been around for quite some time. You can find this on disciples.org, which I would recommend all of you become familiar with. And it identifies the three basic levels of the organization of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in what is being identified as a covenantal relationship: the congregational level, regional level, and general level. So the covenantal relationship is one of the things that we're going to be focusing on. Congregational, regional, and general as the three levels. And what I want to emphasize is that unlike some other kind of church organizations, rather than being a hierarchical top-down authority structure where there's somebody at the top who's clearly the head of the organization, the CEO, if you will. For example, in the Roman Catholic Church, the Pope is clearly at the head of the organization, and everything else filters down from that. The disciples typically have understood themselves as operating at three separate levels concurrently, sharing and dialoguing with each other on these three independent levels. There's no bottom-up organization for the disciples either. It's more egalitarian than it is hierarchical. So if hierarchical is a vertical relationship top-down, and egalitarian would be more of a horizontal egalitarian structure in the way we go about things. Covenant is the important word in what we understand ourselves to be as Christian Church Disciples of Christ. We take very seriously the dialogue that's supposed to take place among the various units, the various levels, and the various structures that bind us together as the Christian Church Disciples of Christ as we go about the business of being the church. So let's start with the general level of the church, and I want to do that by giving an example, okay, about the way in which these three levels function in relationship with one another. And the example I'm going to use is the Commission on the Ministry. Let's have, I happen to have been privileged to serve on that for the Florida region for the past 6 years. Let's say there's a person in your congregation. Just recently, the congregation we associate with has had a young woman who has felt the call to ministry. And we begin working with her in this process. They feel a call to full-time Christian ministry in one form or another. What's the next step? Well, the next step is to talk with the pastor or pastors or other leaders within the congregation about that call. helping to identify exactly what the nature of the call is, see if there is any sort of a pull to a specific form of ministry or if it's a more generalized call, talking through the process, talking through the experience of being called to Christian ministry. That's usually followed by a discussion with the elders, with the church board, whatever that organization is called in your congregation, about support for this person's candidacy. And eventually, when we move into the formal process, somebody in the official body of the church, the elders, the church board, the administrative council, whatever it is, writes a letter to the regional commission on the ministry in support of this person's candidacy for ministry. So that, in effect, becomes a referral to the regional commission on the ministry, which we identify by the term COM, Commission on the Ministry. Now, the commission itself is composed of clergy and laypersons from various congregations in the region. They typically are going to be representative of male and female mix, ethnic racial mix. Sections of the region are to be as equally represented as possible. Members for the commission are recommended by congregations to the commission, by regional officers who know of people who might be good for this particular task, or by current members of the Commission on the Ministry itself, who might know people who would be good partners in this activity, this ministry of the church. Commissioners are asked to serve and commit to 6 years in work with the Commission on the Ministry. Each candidate meets at least once a year with the Commission on the Ministry after establishing a covenant relationship with the candidate. So typically we have 3 or 4 meetings each year on a regular basis, and 3 usually at the conference center at the retreat in Silver Springs, and then 1 usually in the South Florida area. What the commission does with each of the candidates is to monitor the educational process, monitor the spiritual process of working through the meaning and significance of the call as candidates prepare for either ordained ministry or commission ministry within the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the Florida region. The commission has several tasks in addition to meeting with these individuals. One of those is establishing what the criteria for ordination and commissioning of ministers are and publishing those criteria. We do so on our website. We also have a book that we put together for each of the candidates to identify what the process is for seeking ordination or for seeking commissioning. We communicate those criteria with the rest of the regional leadership team. That would be the leadership team itself and the administrative council. And as I said previously, we typically meet 4 times a year. This year, it's been a lot of meeting by remote access, by using our resources like we're using right now, using Zoom to meet with our candidates. And that's both candidates for ordination and for commissioning. So the criteria for ordination and commissioning have a history of their own. Where do those come from? The first place they come from is in 1975 at the General Assembly in San Antonio. The decision was made to make a seminary degree the standard for ordination. Anyone being ordained in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ should have a a seminary degree from a recognized Association of Theological Schools seminary. That was the decision made in 1975. In 2011, at the General Assembly in Nashville, an alternative track was added that would allow for another kind of apprentice track, is what we ended up calling it, toward the approved process for ordination. And the Regional Commission on the Ministry then began working through the implications of those mandates from our General Assembly. The denomination itself has a General Commission on the Ministry, and the members of the General Commission on the Ministry are chosen in a way that's sort of parallel to or similar to the way the Regional Commission on the Ministry is selected. They're people who are nominated or suggested or recommended by people at the general level, at the regional level, and even at the congregational level. So the General Commission on the Ministry began looking at the same questions. When we look at a candidate for ordination or for commissioning in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, what kind of background are we looking for? What kinds of personal qualifications and academic credentials and spiritual formation are we expecting that person to have in order to agree to ordain this person and help them, have them help us lead the ministry of the church into the future? So the General Commission on the Ministry developed a series of criteria through several years of discussion and a lot of back and forth, a lot of give and take, a lot of dialogue and conversation that occurred over a series of years. The Regional Commission went through a similar kind of process, and we developed our own criteria. The Regional Commission on the Ministry cannot develop criteria that are in direct conflict with the criteria from GCOM. But GCOM also has made it clear that the Regional Commission on the Ministry should not cut and paste the GCOM document into the Regional Commission on the Ministry criteria document. So we struggled with that for 5 years, working on the current Policies and Procedures workbook. It is numerous pages long, and it walks the candidate for either ordination or for commissioning all the way through the process, from the initial call all the way through the schooling process, and ending up on the backside with helping to lead them through the process of planning their own ordination or commissioning ceremonies. The very first meeting that a candidate has with the Regional Commission on the Ministry, that person is given one of these portfolios. It's a very large 3-ring binder that has a grid of all the coursework and all of the other kinds of requirements that are in the process of leading to ordination and commissioning. Very, very detailed. And it has personal qualifications, professional competencies, and academic coursework that are required for both ordination and commissioning. All of these items have been developed over years of dialogue between GCOM at the general level, seminaries also at the general level, congregations, clergy, and then finally the members of the Regional Commission on the Ministry. There is a process that works all the way through the levels of the church, from the general church, the regional church, and the congregational level of the church, that feeds into this entire process. And we meet with each candidate at least once a year, hopefully live. Most of the time it's in person. And more recently it's been through Zoom meetings. We follow along with them where they are in their process. which of these criteria have they fulfilled that show up in the the document that they've been handed and that we have worked through with them. Upon completion of the educational coursework, the course of study, COM meets for an ordination interview with the candidate that lasts for 1 hour. And that is a fairly rigorous kind of a process of dialogue with each candidate individually, asking questions about what they have learned about the ministry, what they have learned about themselves, what they have learned about the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, what they've learned about the various levels of the work of the church, what they've learned about the people that they are going to be serving as ministers, whether commissioned or ordained. Once that 1 hour interview and dialogue has taken place, the candidate is escorted for the room while Commission on the Minister discusses that individual. They're brought back into the room if they have been approved, which almost always happens because we have worked with them for 6 years in most cases, getting them to this point. So we know the people that we're going to be interviewing. We know where they've come from and how they have progressed and how they have grown in their understanding themselves and their ministry. After they have been approved by Commission on the Ministry, then that approval is forwarded to the regional leadership team, and they vote on whether to ordain this person into Christian ministry or commission this person into Christian ministry later on. A service of ordination is scheduled at the end of this ordination interview, at least tentatively. That usually takes place in the sponsoring congregation. Not always, but usually in the sponsoring congregation. And the participants in that ordination ceremony, that ordination service, will include representatives from the congregational leadership, representatives from the regional church, representatives from the Commission on the Ministry on the regional level, usually at least one representative from the seminary that person has attended, and then possibly other representatives that are ecumenical in nature from different congregations of the people have interacted with, or from other levels of the church, particularly in the general level of the church. And the ceremony itself, the service of worship, is always glorious, and it's always unique, because each ordination ceremony, each ordination service is developed by the one being ordained in conversation, dialogue with people from all these other constituencies. So that what happens is a worship service that is meaningful to the person being ordained, as well as being meaningful to the church. In a lot of other denominations, you have an ordination process where the person's being ordained in, let's say, the state of Florida in a particular denomination, are all ordained on the same stage at the same time at an annual meeting of the conference, for example. The way we do it is individualized and focused on the person being ordained and what that person wants to say about the ministry to which he or she has been called. It is, it's tailored. It's a tailored process. And you can see the number of levels of the church and the way that they interact on this one particular kind of action of the church. Once the person is ordained, she or he should contact the Office of Search and Call in Indianapolis at the general level of the church. That's the office that then will have them fill out a ministerial profile that identifies what forms of ministry this individual is interested in seeking, And that profile is then made available to all the regions, to the general levels of the church, and ultimately to congregations seeking pastors. This other thing that we always refer the individuals to who are being ordained or being commissioned is to the pension fund. I am in a retired status now, and I can verify, I can affirm how important the pension fund is to those of us who have moved into retired status. Um, when my wife and I were meeting with our financial advisor in planning for my retirement, I showed him the most recent report from the pension fund, and he said, do not, under any circumstances, let this fund lapse because this is gold. This is gold. It's important. It's a way that the church at large, the general level of the church, works with the individuals who are in the process of ordination and those who are serving as ordained ministers or commissioned ministers, to put away funds in partnership with the congregations over the years of service. And it's a really significant ministry of the church. Now, that's just one example. We could use other kinds of illustrations of how these three levels of the church interact with each other and dialogue with one another. So, the general level of the church. The current office of the general minister and president is headed by the Reverend Dr. Teresa or Terry Ford Owens. She came into this role in 2017. Many of you have met her. She's a delightful person and a wonderful speaker and an excellent leader. In her office, the office of general minister, I want to make it clear that we do not have a pope. We don't have a top-down administrator who pronounces from on high what the church is supposed to believe and what the church is supposed to do. Rather, we have someone who sees herself as being in partnership in ministry with people at the regional level, congregational level, and the individual level of the church. She considers herself a pastor to the regional level, the congregational level of the church, the ordained ministry, as well as the lay people of the church. It's not hierarchical. It's not top down. It's not like a pope or a presiding bishop. She does not have that kind of coercive authority. Okay. Now, they work collaboratively within the structure of the church in a covenant relationship across all the levels of the church. So under her office, you have units that deal with things like overseas ministries, homeland ministries, justice ministries, volunteer and advocacy ministries, and care and compassion ministries. Again, on disciples.org, under the umbrella of General Minister and President, Office of the General Minister and President, you can see which units operate under each of these kind of broad categories. The General Board is one of the administrative kinds of functions of the general church that works in concert with the general minister and president and other leaders at the general level. So the general board is composed of members who are nominated by the general and regional ministries of the church. People they know from attending general assemblies, for example, offering workshops at regional and general levels, people who teach at seminaries, people who are well-known ministers and lay people and leaders of the church. There are at-large members that are on the general board from that group that's nominated. There are several ex officio non-voting general and regional leaders that are on the general board. There are representatives from higher education. that are on the general board. And this board meets annually. There's also an administrative committee that is composed of 20 members from the general board, selected from the general board, the general minister and president, the moderators for the General Assembly and the General Church, 7 ex officio members from the general and regional levels, each of whom has no vote on the administrative committee. The administrative committee serves as essentially a board of directors for the office of the general minister and president. Now, the General Assembly meets every other year, usually odd-numbered years. Many of you have already received the word that the 2021 General Assembly in Louisville has been canceled because of COVID and related concerns. Something will take its place, I'm pretty sure, in terms of online electronic options. Each congregation is allowed voting delegates, and the number of voting delegates depends upon the size of the congregation. Each ordained minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ also has a vote at General Assembly. So congregations have the opportunity to send representatives according to the formula by the size of the congregation to the General Assembly, and their vote counts as much as anybody else's vote counts. General Assembly is characterized by worship, fellowship, mission activities, and mission concerns. There is a very large mission fair and bookstore that is set up every year to share resources that are available for congregations and regions. And there's always educational workshops that go on as well. Resolutions, which have been kept at a much more minimal level over the last several General Assemblies. Resolutions can come from congregations, they can come from regions, and they can come from general units. They can also emerge from individuals, usually through one of these other 3 avenues. Okay? The General Assembly meets, discusses, and votes on the resolutions. It's important to remember that the resolutions that are voted on in the General Assembly are just that. They're resolutions voted on at that General Assembly meeting at that particular time, and they are binding only to the General Assembly. They are then forwarded to regions and congregations as recommendations in the collaborative covenantal partnership that exists between the general, regional, and congregational levels of the church. Christian unity has always been an important part of who we are as disciples. Disciples have always been among the leaders of ecumenical work at both local, national, and international levels. The former General Minister and President, the Reverend Dr. Sheridan Watkins, preached the prayer breakfast following President Barack Obama's first inauguration, for example. At the regional level of the church, we are led by our regional minister, the Reverend Dr. Betsy Steyer Gary. Her office is in Ocala at the retreat, the camp and conference grounds at Silver Springs. Betsy's role is, and this is her language, she is the pastor to the pastors. Her job is to oversee and interact with and dialogue with and put her arms around those of us who have been called to the ministry to make sure that we are okay. At this time of COVID and the various challenges of congregations being shut down, there are a lot of pastors who are needing a lot of support, pastorally, spiritually, as well as other kinds of types of support. And Betsy is a delightful person at all of those levels. She oversees the ministry of congregations within Florida. She oversees the ways in which the region resources those congregations so that they're able to do their ministry, and meets regularly with congregations as well as persons in crisis. We are really, really lucky to have Betsy, with whom I have been in ministerial relationship since we were both back in Kentucky when we were both much younger than we are now. Also in the regional level of church, the Reverend Mary Beth Harper is the director of the retreat. She's a member of the ministerial team of the regional church. She oversees the camp and conference programming. Everything that goes on there comes through Mary Beth and her very, very capable kind of marshaling and nurturing of what goes on there. In addition to the regional activities that take place at the retreat at Silver Springs, she also schedules other kinds of events that take place there. There are a couple of quilting groups in Jacksonville and in the Ocala area that meet there on a regular basis to do their quilting and sharing. There's various other church-related organizations that use the facilities from time to time. She's the one that schedules and facilitates those rentals at the retreat and makes sure that those take place in a really, really not just productive, but very important way. The Leadership Council for the region is composed of one representative from each congregation, at least one representative, sometimes two, but at least one. The moderator and moderator-elect of the region, the regional minister, and the director of the retreat are all on that leadership council. And then from each of the congregations, the pastors would be on the leadership council as well. There's also an administrative team, which is composed of the moderator and moderator-elect, the regional minister, the chairperson of COM, of the Stewardship Commission, the Outdoor and Youth Ministries Commissions, the Retreat Facilities Commission, the New and Affiliate Congregations Commission, and then representatives from Convention, the National Convocation, and NAPAD, the Asian and Pacific Americans disciples. The Regional Assembly meets every other year, usually in even-numbered years. The year opposite the General Assembly is when the regional ministry typically operates. It's primarily a fellowship time. There's a lot of worship. There's a lot of music. There's a lot of fellowship. There's a lot of mission discussion and a little bit of business that is conducted as well. The region provides leadership in the pulpit search process, both from the congregational side and from the minister candidate side. The region provides counseling to pastors and congregations in crisis. We have had a number of pastors who have had serious health issues over the last several years, and the regional church provides support and counseling for those individuals. The region also provides overseeing the work of various commissions and engaging in the mission work within the state of Florida. The logo for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ remains paramount for us. This is who we see ourselves being. We are a people of the chalice, as well as being a people of the parentheses. And we are people that see ourselves as keeping the centrality of communion in what we understand to be the characteristic of worship. We celebrate our grounding in the Church of Scotland and that tradition. We are committed to the contributions our history has made and we are engaged in making our theology and our beliefs present and visible in the world in our regional and local levels. The primary statement of who we are in the 21st century is found at disciples.org, and it says, "We are disciples of Christ, a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. As one part of the body of Christ, we welcome all to the Lord's table, as God has welcomed us." That's who we see ourselves being here in the 21st century, both at the regional level and at the national or general level, but more especially in the congregational level, because it's there that our ministry touches the lives of people in cities, in villages, in small towns, and in rural areas. This is who we see ourselves being. This is our mission statement. There are four primary priorities of the church that were voted on in the 2001 General Assembly in what we identified as the 2020 vision, which happens to be the year we're in right now. Four priorities that guide the church for these first 2 decades of the 21st century. Those are becoming a pro-reconciling, anti-racist church. And there's all kinds of training going on at this point in time to develop and train facilitators to learn how to present how we do that at this very, very important and very crucial time in our history. A second priority is the formation of 1,000 new congregations by 2020. And the last report I heard was that we had met that goal. The third priority is transforming at least 1,000 current congregations by 2020. I'm not sure how one identifies success in that regard, but I know that the congregations with which I have been involved have been transforming for many, many years, are in much better places spiritually and ministerially than they have been in many, many years. And then the fourth priority is leadership development necessary to realize these new and renewed congregations. Those are the four priorities that were identified in 2001, pointing toward the year 2020 as the vision for the church and where it was heading. That's who we are, and that's what we see ourselves doing and being at this point in our history. At the congregational level, that's where the rubber meets the road. That is where ministry takes place in what is most likely the most meaningful ways possible. We are in the business of ministering to people. We're not in the business of ministering to the church. We're not ministering to the organization. We're ministering to people. And we're ministering with people. And we're ministering from people. At the congregational level, that's where everything really becomes highlighted and everything really becomes centered. The general and regional levels of the church exist primarily to resource and equip the congregational level to do ministry in local settings. That's really where we function. That's really where we try to focus the call to ministry and the understanding of the polity of the church. So the question I ask for you as individuals, as congregations engaging in these sessions, as small groups and family groups looking at what we're doing here, I want you to identify how many ways you see congregations and their members with opportunities to dialogue with what happens at the general and regional level. How can you be involved as an individual and as congregations in the Christian church in Florida, and in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ in the universe, in the United States and Canada. I know for certain from having participated with those other levels outside the congregation that the general church and the regional church want to dialogue with congregations because they are members of congregations as well. That's where they all come from. And that's where they see the important ministry of the church to be focused as we move forward in the 21st century. How many ways do you see the general and regional levels providing resources for reflection and mission at the congregational level? Let me give you one quick example. When I was in undergraduate school, I was convinced that I was going to be a lawyer. I was heading in that direction. And I had the opportunity to be a counselor at church camp at Bethany Hills in Tennessee, where I had grown up and where I'd experienced many, many years of camp and conference, beginning in 6th grade and all the way through high school. So I'd gone to be a counselor while I was in undergraduate school. And I was talking with the director of that particular CYF conference. And he says, "So, Ellen, tell me, what are you going to do with your life? What do you see yourself being and doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be a lawyer." And he said, "No, you're not. You're not going to be a lawyer. You're going to be a minister." He was right. He was right. He was a pastor in a congregation. He was active in the regional church and the camp and conference program. And he recognized someone with a call to the ministry that had not yet identified that call. That's how the process works. That's how we become engaged in not just what's happening in the congregation, but at the regional level, from people who touch us, people who identify us, people who call us, and people who help us see our own calls. So as we conclude these sessions together, as we conclude that activity that we've been going through, these 4 sessions that I've had the opportunity to share with you, I want to invite you to now consider joining a Zoom call at the time that's identified by the regional assembly. A Zoom call with me where you'll have a chance to ask any sorts of questions that you have based upon the information that I've tried to share in these 4 sessions, and anything else that you might have that has come up in your mind that have been spurred by the material that's been presented here. I want to thank you for your participation and your attention, and I wish you and all of yours the best ministry that you can possibly enjoy. Thank you.